Welcome back. I'm Yang Ming, Caixin's correspondent based in Singapore. This afternoon, we will have 5 sessions covering different topics, from China's decarbonization plan to regulating big tech. We will start with a special dialogue between Shan, chief editor of Caixin Summit, and Dr. Parag, Khanna, founder and managing partner for FutureMap. Let's welcome Parag to the stage, please.
Hello, Parag. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon. And now I can see you as well.
Good to see you again. I think 4 or 5 years passed since last time we met in Chengdu, right?
That's exactly right. Very nice to see you. Greetings from everyone in Singapore here in the Marina Bay Sands. And I'm looking forward to this dialogue. Our timing is, of course, very appropriate given COP26, the 6th Plenum, the US-China communique. Perhaps we can start by talking about COP26. It has not been, of course, the main priority in Beijing given the 6th Plenum, but I think let's begin by exchanging some views from your vantage point in Beijing about COP26, and then I'll share my views.
Great. I will start with my personal observation. First of all, I would say people actually are kind of surprised by yesterday's announcement by John Kerry and Xie Zhenhua, Special Envoy for Climate Change in Glasgow. Actually, this is in my memory, it's the first time China jumped on board on US initiated so-called methane reduction effort, right? And we know it's really kind of signature projects of the Biden administration. And previously, just the advanced economies joined the so-called methane reduction program. But this time, I think China really demonstrated its flexibility and the seriousness to deal with, the problem beyond CO2, carbon dioxide oxide. So I think this represents a big step, in my view, on Chinese side, because number one, we know that we still facing the what we call power crunches, which created by the inclement winter season, but also the so-called domestic greenhouse gases reduction program. But we still face a lot of the headwinds in dealing with the climate change. Mm-hmm. So I think this represents a big step in Chinese side, on Chinese side, that we can really promise to reduce our methane in the years to come. Although China did not really commit to the pledge. I mean, it's a kind of a soft target for China. But anyway, I think from that perspective, I would say this represents a big step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that, though. I think at the last minute, of course, China, India, other countries have not been as willing as some Western countries have wanted in terms of their commitment to more rigid targets for emissions reductions. But of course, I think that there is this allowance and appreciation for what has been done on the methane agreement. And also given the backdrop of the power crunch, which is obviously struck at this time, which is a reminder, of course, that this energy transition is going to take quite a while. And we've seen this, of course, for different reasons. The Chinese situation, India, Europe, all simultaneously. Of course, some of the largest energy consuming and emissions generating economies. So it's this evidence that we need to do more, but also that we have to do it sooner. Now, my comment on COP26 on the whole would be that given that there have been a number of very serious investigative reports around carbon accounting, and that genuinely we need to be not suspicious or dubious, but we need to be somewhat skeptical that the world is doing enough according to the timeline that it should. The evidence clearly supports this somewhat cynical view. because emissions are not being reduced quickly enough. The carbon accounting is being used by some countries to portray more rapid emissions reductions than are actually taking place. And therefore, even though we have to continue the process of committing even greater resources to the technologies and the policies of decarbonization, those mitigation measures are insufficient. And we also have to focus on adaptation. And adaptation is not receiving as much investment. Adaptation amounts to about 6 to 7% of total investment into climate policy areas. So there is a very significant deficit there. But when we think about adaptation, we don't spend in a global way the way we do around decarbonization. And with adaptation, things like retrofitting of infrastructure, seawalls and barriers, adaptive agricultural practices, flood control, all of these things are done at a much more localized level, at a much more national level than at the global level. And in the interest of having a world economy that progresses collectively, so that we have an inclusive transition in terms of sort of carbon transition and foster inclusive growth along the way, I do think that we need a better balance there. Now, China has done much more for adaptation than other countries. It's also doing a lot for mitigation. I would be curious if you have views on what are some of the best practices and lessons. Of course, China is a large exporter of solar power, for example. That's mitigation as well as adaptation. But are there lessons from what China has done in adaptation that we can use and export, and that can be important lessons for other countries?
Well, you definitely point out a very critically important issue about adaptation, and even people talking about the damage and the reparation, right? So particularly for the least developed countries and the sea island countries, I think they are definitely at the forefront of the climate change. So definitely China is still, but I must admit, China is still a developing country. Even you say we really, have spread a lot of money, Belt and Road initiatives and a lot of overseas projects, but still China remain a developed country and suffer from, also the impacts by the climate change. So talking about this summer's the Henan flooding issue, and we know a lot of the Chinese urban cities, urban centers still fragile when it comes to taking the impact from the climate change, floods, droughts, wildfires, you name it. So when it comes to China's the best practice adaptation, I think China really trying to. I think one of the key features about Chinese the overall carbon dioxide reduction efforts is about the deforestation, and we have known that I think this has been in place for the 3 decades. We're talking about the Gobi deserts, China really planted a lot of hundreds, millions of trees along the line of the northern Gobi deserts, and really which we call this the northern the windproof the forest wall. So I think these efforts, and also I think agreed to by all participants in the COP26. People really, I think this is one of the bright spots when it comes to the final communique from the COP26. People really committed to the deforestation, to combat the deforestation as the major step in the reducing the carbon footprint. Yes, I know. It's really controversial issue. People say this is not enough and totally sufficient to deal with the real challenge. But I think baby step is better than nothing done, right? So I think talking about China's the adaptation, and I think we still at the learning curve. For example, talking about we call it sponge city, right? We call sponge city. That means city can really adapt itself to the increasingly incidences of flooding and the other extreme weather events. Right. But it turns out that our efforts in that respect is not successful. So if you just look at the evidence on the ground. So I think the Chinese government admitted that we are still, just take the baby steps in the best tactics of the adaptation to the challenges brought by climate change. But I think definitely the combat deforestation and trying to make China as the energy shift, for example, to the more natural gas. I know natural gas still in some critical view as kind of a dirty source of energy. But anyway, I think the natural gas is definitely is cleaner than the coal. And also another issue is about nuclear plants. So I think everybody, quite as far as I know, I think people really try to hide the nuclear plants. China is the ongoing or nuclear plants underway as the kind of hidden topic. People don't really talk about this issue publicly. But as far as I know, China definitely taking the leading role in the construction of nuclear plants in the years to come. China maybe is the biggest country in that efforts. And I know it's also a very controversial issue, but to meet the targets of carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060 for developing country like China, I think you cannot just put all your eggs in one basket. That means wind power and solar power. So you definitely need to kind of rely upon so-called less dirty power, nuclear and natural gas. I think it's inevitable, particularly this inclement winter season, the power crunches here, they really give us kind of warning sign that you must be realistic.
China has been more consistent on nuclear power than other countries where it has been so politicized, especially after the Fukushima nuclear incident in Japan. But now the mood is shifting back in terms of supporting more nuclear investments, whether it is the existing or more frontier technologies. So let's talk about another baby step. You were right about some of the baby steps that are being taken in terms of energy transition issues. Let's talk about the baby step of the US-China joint communique in the context of US-China relations. My view is that it is better to have, for great powers, to have multidimensional relations, to not have the relationship be hostage or hijacked by a single issue. And as you know, in Washington, there has been a debate about whether climate diplomacy could be or should be an area of progress despite geopolitical tensions or not. I take the view that, again, superpowers must have a climate track, military track, economic track, trade, financial, many other dimensions of the dialogue, all operating simultaneously. That is the surest way to ensure that we do not have a new Cold War situation. So in that context, what is your view on the US-China communique and its potential significance?
Well, if you look back, if you allow us to go back to the early this year, since the Biden administration went to White House, we have seen several high-level in-person or virtual meetings. But to my mind, I think the most important meeting between officials or representatives from both US and China was taking place in Tianjin late August, early September, between Xie Zhenhua and John Kerry. And this is also the second visit by John Kerry to China. And as far as I know, John Kerry not just met with his counterpart and also the Vice Premier Han Zheng, but also he got met virtually definitely by the Wang Yi, the state councilor, and Yang Jiechi, the Politburo member, the highest ranking diplomat, so in China now. And I think this represents kind of reversal of the codes, since the Anchorage meeting, late this March. And I think this is not just about climate dialogue and climate negotiation. It's went beyond that. It's really had something to do with the so-called strategic security dialogue, right? Because your counterparts now, not just Xie Zhenhua or Han Zheng, but also the two most senior Chinese diplomats, veteran diplomats. So I think from that point, the meeting, and also get a lot of heads up about how important John Kerry is in Biden's cabinet. So even he just focused on a very niche area like climate change, but he definitely has President Biden's ear. So I think the Chinese government realized that the importance of the John Kerry status within its government, Biden's government. So China does everything trying to give a helping hand to John Kerry's status within the cabinet. So that's why we really find China really buckle and agreed to, as I mentioned before, jump on board of the Biden administration initiated methane reduction program. So I'm not to try to overemphasize the importance of John Kerry's status within the Biden administration, because we know quite a lot of hawkish figures within the Biden administration. But I will still emphasize that we know next Monday, right? Monday, I think American evening and also Tuesday morning. So two presidents, President Xi and President Biden, will hold their first ever summit, even in virtual form. And I think at least, so this is it's carry more symbolic gesture than the substance. But anyway, I think the dialogue and the summit will definitely stabilize, or at least put the floor under the will enhance tense, competitive U.S.-China relations. Mm-hmm. And we have seen some, positive signals in a run-up to the summit. And I anticipate more progress in the week of a summit. For example, I will anticipate, for example, the U.S. side will scale down the punitive tariffs, in the form of exemption or elimination. Another thing is really, I think the U.S. could resume or relax kind of the export control measures. And I latest noticed that U.S. really hope to re-export, for example, for the civilian use and semiconductors or chips to China. It's not total about the really high end or national security level chips or semiconductors. But when it comes to the civilian use and semiconductors, I think the U.S. may agree to resume this kind of export. And also we know that the natural gases and continuous foodstuff purchase from China. So hopefully, and we will see more positive signals in the wake of the summit. But as everybody knows that the summit can really, put floor, I would say, put floor under the bilaterals, the avoiding continuous escalation of tensions. But at least I think I can hope for the short-term tranquility in the months to come. I will not say years to come, but months to come. So another point I really want to point out is that in Chinese mind, so we actually really think twice before we really spending political capital to curry favor or mend fences with Biden administration, because we know each 4 years, so the White House, you will very intense competition for the White House. So if it's definitely a big if the Biden administration is to kick out of the White House by 2024, so what's the meaning of Chinese leadership spreading, spending so much political capital to try to mend fences with the Biden administration? So we must think twice before we really dedicate ourselves to mend fences, spending political capital to mend fences with the White House.
It's a very interesting point. I think this is going to have to be our last few moments, but I'll respond on each of these. Of course, the result of the most recent of the 6th Chinese Plenum is that we do know that President Xi is certainly going to outlast, let's say, President Biden, by some number of years. The only question is how many, and therefore I can fully understand your perspective, and I think it's very fair of you to point out that not only in China but elsewhere in the world, people are looking at this the Biden administration and wondering how long it will be in power. That said, it's equally important, as you pointed out, and I think you said so very eloquently, that hopefully this summit will set a floor for the relationship, such that irrespective of what happens in the U.S. from 2024 onwards, that we can maintain this degree of stability as a baseline. And I think you also pointed out some of the interesting things that we should be looking for next week and beyond around potential accommodation on some of the supply chain issues and technology issues. The final point I'll make is that ultimately my hope is that even though there are very competitive dynamics around infrastructure, supply chains, technology, and other areas, the direction that we might actually be headed into is one in which the dispersal of supply chains for critical technologies, whether it is 5G equipment or semiconductors or otherwise, spreading outward with more R&D and more investment and production in Japan, Korea, even India, the United States, will help every country eventually to alleviate the shortfall, the bottlenecks, the constraints that have afflicted and that have punished really all of our industries worldwide. So let us hope then that competition actually leads to abundance in many ways, and one can apply this logic to the area of environmental technology as well as to critical information technologies. And if that is also part of the medium-term and long-term outcome, then we can hope for a more optimistic future. So on that note, Shan Huang, thank you so much for joining us at the summit, and thank you all for being here and for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Parag. Thank you.